A court has, and this has been playing in the news all day today, and this is where we can talk about Kemi Badenoch's performance today, actually. A court has given Gazans the right to settle in the United Kingdom. A Palestinian had success after applying through a scheme meant for Ukrainians, the Homes for Ukraine scheme, and the people have argued that actually this is worrying because it could open the floodgates, and that's come from the Home Office, right, which isn't exactly au fait with border controls and robust words on border measurements. A family of 6 seeking to flee Gaza were allowed to join their brother in Britain after an immigration judge ruled that the Home Office's rejection of their application breached their human right. How many times must we hear that a person's human right has been breached, and therefore Britain's borders must be breached? Let's not forget that people in Gaza voted time and again for Hamas. All the polling suggests that they still support Hamas. They're supportive of what happened on October 7th to those Israeli girls, women, elderly people, and the rape that took place as well. Supportive. The Jews are dogs. And that's what they think. How would they feel about us as Westerners in this country? I don't want it to happen. I'm quite clear. It shouldn't happen with Pakistan. We shouldn't bring people from Pakistan here. We shouldn't bring people from Gaza here. We shouldn't bring people from a whole host of nations. We've got our own problems to deal with. John McTernan, he was an advisor to Tony Blair. He tweeted me last night and he said, well, Darren, have you seen Gaza lately? And I said, John, have you seen Britain lately? I don't want Britain to become the next Gaza. So Gaza, the judge in this case, so I mentioned there that a judge said, yes, of course you can come. The judge is the son of an ex-Guardian journalist who campaigns against Israel online. Now, the sins of the father aren't always the sins of the son, but my politics isn't a million miles away from my mother's politics. This is pretty normal. So could it be that this man has been soaked in Guardianista politics and that actually we've got an activist judge there, which of course there are countless examples of this taking place. And the latest on that is that Starmer stood up today and said this.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I do not agree with the decision. She's right. It's the wrong decision. She hasn't quite done her homework because the decision in question was taken under the last government.
That's disputed heavily.
Is already looking at the legal loophole which we need to close in this particular case. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear.
So they say they're looking into it. He blames the Tory government and says that this decision was taken under them. That's disputed. The Conservatives are disputing that as we speak. I heard that today. And the Telegraph, leading the charge on this, say that judicial review has to take place. Sir Keir Starmer said in that clip there that Parliament should be the one to make the rules on immigration. Well, it's in his gift. Parliament is sovereign. Now, thanks to Brexit, by the way, Parliament is sovereign. Parliament can make these decisions. If we don't want anyone from Gaza to come here, these Hamas supporters to come here, well, we have the right to legislate to make it so. We can legislate to bind a judge's hands so they can't make these decisions. We must do that because I tell you right now, the people like Owen Jones who support these people coming here, who support Hamas, or at least support the struggle of the people in Gaza, if not Hamas, they would argue that actually, of course they should come here. What are they going to do when they suddenly have a load of people who don't support trans rights, who don't support gay rights, who don't support women's rights? Which one are they going to choose in this dicing with death scenario they've created for themselves? It'll be too late because then you'll end up like the state of Iran, in which, the Marxists got into bed with the Ayatollah. And look how that turned out. The Marxists ain't alive anymore, folks. This is a scenario I foresee. So I'm deeply concerned about it. I'm deeply concerned about the judicial activism. I can't imagine Keir Starmer would legislate in this area, but if he did, even I, absolutely, the most dark, complete and utter, I reject Labour like you wouldn't believe. I hate everything they stand for. But if he did this, I would back him to the hilt, and I would clap my hands once he did it.
But
who
whether
did
he
I
does
start
it
with
or
last
not,
time? Connie, yes, go ahead, Connie.
whether he does it or not is another question. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not a parliamentary expert, but he didn't answer specifically about what he's going to, Kemi was asking, are you going to introduce legislation or at least amend the bill that deals with this? And he said, yes, we're doing something, but he couldn't say what. And he kept saying, I've
Yes.
answered your question, but he didn't actually say how he was going to do it. So I think it was quite, it was obviously just patronising and just political theatre to say things like that. But I agree with you, Darren. I'm very worried about the precedent that this sets. And the irony that the sort of people who would be happy to accept these people to come to the UK, we say it all the time, how ironic Queers for Palestine is. It's basically the same thing. But also, if we do start allowing some Gazans to come here and then they get citizenship, they may have relatives in other Middle Eastern states where they have perhaps even not just as similar as Hamas, sort of their views, but maybe even worse. So it's not limited to just Gazans. If the Gazans come over and then they settle, get citizenship, which is obviously very easy these days, and then they have relatives in other countries, that's opening the door to people from even more. It's it's not just the people in Gaza that could end up coming here. And I feel like a few years ago I would have been so scared to say something like that, but I don't think it's I don't
Good for you.
when it comes to these things, you have to make generalizations sometimes when these people have been on a diet, as Julie Hartley-Brewer was saying today, on a diet of Hamas indoctrination. What and if these people who are in favor of helping everyone who's suffered hardship in different countries, they just seem to think that as soon as their foot steps foot on British soil, that suddenly they're going to adapt to our socially liberal culture. That's obviously not the case, and we can see it happening now, but people just want to turn a blind eye to it and continue doing the same. It's not going to get any better. And also, think about how people go on about how the UK is funding a genocide, and Gazans are going to be aware of the fact that obviously we are supporters of Israel. They are not going to be happy with us. So who the hell knows what could happen after this precedent's been set.
Chloe, you are on Channel 4 every Monday at 9 o'clock with
they've actually just dropped the whole series. Go back to where you came from. They've actually just dropped the whole series on the Channel 4 player if anyone wants to binge watch it in one go.
Go back to where you came from. I find myself saying that quite a lot. Go back to where you came from. Chloe,
the lefties
in
are
your experience,
about that title.
They are. In your experience, you travelled all over meeting people who will be in similar situations to this family of Gazans coming here are. Where do you stand on, as Connie's just articulated, the idea that you do need to have a kind of blanket policy that says, I'm sorry, but we can't take the risk?
Yeah, I think at the moment, the way it is, when we assess whether we're going to approve someone's asylum claim or not, we just look at, how dangerous is the country that they are supposedly coming from, or how impoverished is the country that they're supposedly coming from. Now, when we live in a world where there are millions and millions upon millions of people, perhaps even billions, living in, absolute poverty in horrendous countries, awful situations, and we're only going to take in, if we are going to take in a small proportion of those people, why not be picky about which countries you allow people to come into Britain from? Okay, why not pick the countries that have a culture that is slightly more aligned with ours? Why not pick the countries where there is a lower chance of getting an extremist posing as a normal civilian? The reality is, as you pointed out, Connie, the Gazans have been fed a diet of Hamas indoctrination, and we have seen Hamas posing as civilians, and then as soon as the ceasefire was announced, say they suddenly found their Hamas headbands again. I expect it's quite likely we would get people who are Hamas members claiming to be normal, nice civilians applying for this scheme, and the Home Office not realising that they are dodgy people. And even if we assume that everyone that comes here from Gaza is not an extremist and is not a Hamas supporter and not someone who's going to potentially go on to commit an attack, the reality is, even if they're not extremists in that sense, you make the good point about, about gay people, right? When I was in Syria,
Women.
everyone that we met seemed incredibly lovely, and we were thinking, wow, the people here are so nice. We're absolutely shocked. And then I turned around and said to our security guard, okay, but what happens here if you were found to be gay? And he very quickly said, that does not end well for you. Okay, so it's the norm for them, and in Islam, homosexuality is a sin. Even fairly moderate Muslims support that notion. That's not an extremist point of view. Do you really want that coming to Britain when we've
Well,
gone
it is
through
in Christianity as well, but we
many-
don't kill them.
We
That's
don't
the
kill them.
difference.
So different. This point is often made, right? So Muslims will say, "Why do people say that Islam is an extreme ideology?" When, if you look at any holy book, there's dodgy stuff in all of them. The reality is that the Christian community have advanced their morality. They have changed. Modern
Yes.
Christians do not believe word for word everything that the Bible says. However, your average Muslim probably does still believe in the line of the Quran that says homosexuality is a sin. They haven't progressed in the same way that the Christian community has. So when someone points out an extreme line in a holy book, the question is not, is that line of the book extreme? Because you'll find that in every book. The question is, does your typical follower of this faith still believe in that? So it's definitely something to be concerned about. And also, we found that, as I said, most of the people that we met and we were interviewing were extremely lovely people, but then we were speaking to a lovely Syrian teacher, and he did tell us that there is still, amongst the general population, still definitely a lot of lingering ISIS ideology, because they were indoctrinated heavily. And that's something you've got to be concerned about. And I think the Home Office absolutely needs to start taking into account the potential impact on our national security. You're seeing more and more terrorist attacks happening. If you look at the map across Europe, interestingly, you don't see a single dot on the map in Poland.
No,
Well, I wonder why. They don't
why.
take in any illegal migrants. It's something the Home Office really does need to take into account, and people will argue against this, saying, oh, you're being racist, you're suggesting every Palestinian or every Syrian is a terrorist. No, I'm not. I'm just saying, if you take someone from that country, there's a much higher likelihood than someone coming from Ukraine that they are going to be an extremist. It's just true. It's facts.
Michael says, look at the hostage releases that Hamas released. Do we really want them? And then Paul says, this country is already full. Don't they realise that? And Keir says, I think we must accept that not all cultures are going to be compatible with British culture. Elliott, where are you on what's been discussed so far?
Yeah, no, I think a blanket policy would be something that would be good for this situation, and also other ones as well that we haven't mentioned. But I'm just thinking of all the groups that are going to be affected by these migrants that are definitely going to come in the next couple of years under this government, probably. Like women, for example, is the main one I'm thinking of. There's tens of millions of women in this country who are going to be at risk even further than they already are through the illegals that are here, to, a culture that does not respect women, doesn't respect gay people, and of course doesn't respect Jews either. So that's three groups straight away that are going to be at a massive risk of being targeted, attacked, harassed in the street, in their own country. I would put a blanket over that and just say, look, and also some other countries in the Middle East where there's a lot of terrorists, of course. But I think it's, there's no price on safety. You'd put as much money as possible to keep your own country safe. If you offend some people who don't live here, does that really matter when you're protecting the people who live here under your own nation? I don't think so. I think the people who live here are more important, really, than some refugees halfway across the world, no matter what the situation.
So why?
Yeah, and on that point about just briefly on that point about safety that you make there, Elliott, just linking that back to our conversation earlier about how we pay huge taxes with the hope that we're going to have proper public services and we're going to have safe streets, right? People pay so much money to the state to make their country function, and very importantly, to make sure that their streets are safe and that if they have children, they'll be able to grow up in a safe community. People's taxes are not being used to keep the streets safe, when actually their taxes are being used to put up groups of, hundreds of men at a time in hotels. And someone, I can't remember who made the point recently, but if you take, 300-400 young men and put them in a hotel with nothing to do, they're not allowed to work, right? Even if they were English, they would get up to no good. They would start causing chaos in the community and start roaming around in gangs. What do you expect if you give 400 young men nothing to do, sat in a hotel on their asses?
Yeah.
And it's just not fair for the women. It's not fair for the women of this country. It's not fair for the taxpayers of this country. It's not fair on people who deserve to be able to bring up their kids in a safe society.
Why then, Elliott, though, did you have a criticism against Kemi Badenoch? Because she would argue she was raising these issues at Prime Minister's questions, and that actually, she 6 questions she had Sir Keir Starmer on the ropes. I mean, where do you think she went wrong?
I mean, for me, it's just, I think the main criticism people have now is it doesn't really matter who is the leader of the Tories at this point, I don't think.
Yeah.
Because they're all part of the previous government, all the prominent figures. John Nick's still around, even though he was the immigration minister when we had the most immigration ever. And they've just lost all reputation, the credibility, and of course, just reform existing as well has just completely made them they're going to be made redundant pretty soon, I'm sure. One of the polls put them at 18%, which is absolutely insane. And I just think whatever Kemi says, it just doesn't really matter anymore, to be honest, in terms of the trajectory of the Tory party.